Welcome everybody to this SANParks Women in Conservation webinar. There still are a few people coming in, but whilst we wait for them to come in, let me just say, please put your questions in the Q&A, and at the end we will have all the ladies answer your questions for you. So Q&A, please. You can, if you want to send a message to one of the ladies specifically or a question specifically to them, you can also put it in the chat room, but preferably the Q&A, and then just indicate who you would like or who you think would be the best person to answer your question. And now I'm going to disappear, and the voices you're going to hear for the next little while will all be the wonderful ladies in conservation. So I'm going to hand over to Gabby from SANParks, who's going to do the introductions and introduce you to each of the speakers tonight. So Gabby, all over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Gabrielle Fenter. You can call me Gabby. I am the Manager of Media and Stakeholder Relations at SANParks. I'm going to be giving you a brief introduction of the ladies that will be speaking in our Women in Conservation, the Changing Face of Conservation webinar. I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Charlotte Nkuna, who will give us a brief overview of women working in conservation at SANParks. I'm going to quickly start my slideshow. So if you give me a second. There we go. So, as I said, I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Charlotte Nkuna. She has a career that spans over 2 decades and has held several influential positions since she graduated as a veterinary surgeon at the Medical University of Southern Africa in 1997. Before moving to her current position as General Manager of Veterinary Wildlife Services in SANParks, she worked at various animal health organizations and veterinary services in South Africa and the UK. Her career highlights include involvement in projects seeking to improve access to vaccines for marginalized farmers with the Global Alliance for Veterinary Medicines. Dr. Nkuna has a Bachelor of Veterinary Medicine and Surgery, a certificate in the Principles and Practices of Brand Communication, and a Master's in Business Administration. She has held several positions within the South African Veterinary Council, as well as being President of the South African Veterinary Association and the Vice Chairperson of the National Animal Health Forum, amongst others. She was nominated twice as one of South Africa's most influential women in business and government by CEO magazine. She will be giving us the main presentation tonight, and then our panel tonight consists of 5 other ladies from SANParks who have a passion for conservation and wildlife. I'm going to briefly introduce them as I hand over to Dr. Nkuna. Now, Navashni Govender is our Senior Manager of Conservation Management at Kruger National Park. She oversees the implementation of biodiversity and conservation programs in the Kruger. One of her responsibilities is using fire as a tool for ecosystem management, developing the fire policies, and then obviously implementing the fire policies for Kruger. She's the co-chair of the Southern African Fire Network, serves as the Fire Protection Officer for the Greater Kruger Fire Protection Association, and is a research associate, at Nelson Mandela University. She has over 20 years of experience as a savanna fire ecologist in South Africa, mainly burning in Kruger National Park and with working on fire. Next up is Professor Wendy Foden. She is the General Manager at the Cape Research Centre, which is responsible for conservation research in 6 of Western Cape's national parks and 3 of the region's marine protected areas. She also leads the development of SANParks' climate change preparedness strategy. Wendy is an associate professor at the Stellenbosch University and an honorary research associate at UCT, where she teaches a master's course in conservation leadership She also chairs the IUCN Species Survival Commission's Climate Change Specialist Group, a global collaboration of researchers and conservationists aiming to strengthen the bridges between science, practice, and policy. Wendy recently won the IUCN's George Rabb Award for Innovative Conservation and the British Ecological Society's Marsh Award for Outstanding Climate Change Research. Her colleague at the Cape Research Centre, another of our panelists, is Dr. Alison Koch, SANParks marine biologist and an honorary research associate at the South African Institute of Aquatic Biodiversity and the Institute for Communities and Wildlife in Africa. Alison heads the Marine Research Unit at the Cape Research Centre and specializes in sharks and assessing marine protected area effectiveness. Then we have Lindiwe Makabela. She is our veterinary technologist at SANParks Veterinary Wildlife Services in Kimberley. She has a BTech in veterinary technology and started her career in a diagnostics laboratory in a microbiology department. She moved to SANParks in August 2018. She's the lady who's in charge of the biobank lab, where all biological materials stored and preserved for research purposes. She's involved in sample collection and processing of different immobilized animals in various parks, as well as mass capture operations where they capture animals in large family groups with a net or curtain boma, and they tranquilize them for transport. Finally, our last panel member is Tiniko Golele, a regional ranger of the Shanatseni North region in the Kruger. She has a national diploma in nature conservation and a BTech in management from the Tshwane University of Technology, as well as a BSc honors in environmental management from UNISA. Tiniko is currently studying a CMBA with the African Leadership University in Rwanda. She serves in different committees in the park and supports the Environmental Monitors Program, which is currently contributing to conservation in the communities on the western boundary of Kruger. Well, guests, with that mouthful, I'm over. I will now hand over to Dr. Charlotte Nkuna. Thank you.
Good evening, guests. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar today. And we're very excited as SANParks ladies in conservation to be having a long and nice discussion with you about our passion, things that excite us, as well as opportunities that exist for women in conservation. I will start sharing my screen and going through my presentation. So mine is just to give you an introduction of SANParks, who we are, and also just making sure that you know exactly what is available for young women and all women in conservation as opportunities. Right. So we're talking about the changing face of conservation. And I would like to start off by just letting you, giving you a very brief background of SANParks. So our vision as SANParks is to create a world-class system of sustainable national parks, reconnecting and inspiring society. And we do that by our mission, and our mission is as stated there. However, I have picked up a few phrases that I would like you to keep in mind as we're going through our discussions. We're looking at a system of sustainable national parks, and also where we're representing biodiversity and heritage assets. And we're also looking to conserve this heritage and biodiversity assets so that we have them still available for the just and equitable benefit of our current and future generations. Now, SANParks has five main divisions. We have the divisions of parks, which is the 18 parks that are excluding Kruger National Park. And these parks make up 2 million hectares of our land. Then Kruger National Park has the other half of our land, which is 2 million hectares as well. And then we have the conservation services. Most of the ladies we have today are from conservation services, and they will be sharing with you their passions and their experiences, and also the stories. And some of them have very good and exciting stories that they're going to share with you, so that you can at least connect with them. Every time you go to the parks, you can also remember those stories and be inspired by the work that they're doing. Then we also have tourism. This is our money maker, and our colleagues in tourism make sure that we as conservationists are able to continue with the mandate that we have of conserving the national assets. And then we have, of course, what would we be without being a good corporate citizen? And as such, we have our division that is responsible for socioeconomic development. And here is where we work with communities and also with various entities as well as organizations to be able to contribute to communities close to us. And our flagship program, which is the Wildlife Economy Program, is designed to bring on board previously disadvantaged individuals into the space of game and wildlife conservation. So I was inspired as I was preparing for this session today by a quote I saw from an article by Jennifer Morris, the CEO of the Nature Conservancy, where she talks about how we cannot save the planet without women. And the quote that hit hard at me and made me stand up and think was where she says, someday we won't need to highlight women in conservation. But to get to that day, we must elevate the visibility of women doing this work so that others will realize, I can do that too. And the team we have put together today is actually going to try and do that and get people to think, I can also do that. Now, looking at women within SANParks, you will notice that actually the organization is not doing quite badly in terms of representativity within SANParks, where SANParks has a total staff complement of just under 4,000. And of those, 1,608 are women. And we have 140 women in management. And this is about 39.6% of the management makeup of the organization. So you can tell that it's actually not so bad, but we strive to be better. We do know that in the world we have more women than we do men, and therefore these numbers should also show that. And South Africa is not any different, and therefore we also strive to make sure that we get women to be at least 50% or even higher as per the demographics of the country. So what are some of the challenges that women encounter in the space of conservation? I think most people have always taken conservation as being a man's world, and you get asked questions like, are you strong enough? Are you going to cope with the long days out in the bush? What about the dark nights out in the wilderness? You'll hear some interesting stories from someone like Tinyiko, for instance, as a ranger, who has on a regular basis has to be out there in the dark, in the wilderness, where sometimes it's quite dangerous. But she takes that on the chin and she carries on as in terms of fulfilling her passion for conservation. So sometimes the women will complain of lack of support, and then there are also challenges with the lack of voice, where women feel they are not heard or they are not being listened to. And in terms of performance, there's always a performance bias towards men, that men tend to get points even when the performance is not any different from that of women. And likability and the desire to be liked and accepted also still lingers around. And all of those things are things that, over and above that, the work that needs doing, are things that women carry on their shoulders and also worry about on a regular basis. However, that is not what being a woman in nature conservation is about. We have positive and experiences as well, where as a team, we do support each other and we create a nurturing environment, as well as coaching and mentoring others who come and work with us or are under our care. And then an organization that is diverse and inclusive is actually a better organization, because then all ideas are taken on board. And as an organization, we strive to make sure that any ideas that come around and are presented are actually considered and taken on board. So what areas of work can women get involved in within the organization? We have tourism, as I've mentioned. There's also our support, the engine behind all this work that you see in the forefront, where we have a human capital management, IT, and legal, as any other organization. We have conservation, again, socioeconomic transformation, parks, and finance. So the opportunities are immense and they're diverse. And there's space for everyone. You don't need to wear the uniform we wear. You can wear corporate uniform, but still be as important as the people who are out there on the ground. We are all parts of a cog, we are cogs in a machine, and each and every piece of the machine has its own role. Now, you will hear each and every one of the ladies is going to share their story. We were asked to share a brief story, something that's memorable and inspirational that we have come across or have experienced as during our day-to-day work. And I could have shared this one, which is my first elephant capture in Ada, or how my fear of height is not limiting me from getting on top of trucks when the work calls for that and the animals need to be looked after. Or even just sitting on the truck, not looking down because of fear of being very scared of being too high up in the air. But rather, I chose to share an experience that I had about a year into my time at SANParks, where we had the Black Rhino Range Expansion Project that we do with other partners. And for me, that was the defining moment. That was something that I thought, this is what being part of a bigger thing is. This is where I'm doing something that's bigger than myself. I'm doing something that's bigger than each of us individually and contributing to a much, much bigger idea and much bigger purpose. And I would like to share this short video with you as a conclusion of my presentation, just to share my part of the story. Thank you. I'll hand over back to Gabby.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Very interesting presentation. Now, what we will do is we are going over to Navashni Govender. I like to call her the fire lady. So Navashni, over to you.
Thank you, Gabby, and thank you, Charlotte, for the introduction. Yes, I can work with fire, but let's see whether I can get this technology going. Share screen. Are we winning?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so I just got the one slide and really some pictures that I have about my career as a fire ecologist. So I am currently the senior manager for conservation based in the Kruger National Park. But I only took up that role about 5 years ago. And I really started my career in SANParks and Kruger in 2001 when I was employed as the fire ecologist or the fire technician in Kruger. So yes, I do have about 20 years of experience and working in conservation, specifically in my field of expertise as a fire ecologist, a savanna fire and grassland fire ecologist. That's really my passion and where I built my career on in SANParks. So really, I would like to talk about the role that fire has, and it's a really important driver. But as a woman in this specific field, it is a very male-dominated field. We know that. And it has started with that and still continues to being that, because very often when I'm in meetings and stuff, I am not only the only female, but also the only person of that's non-white. So fire is still very much a male-dominated arena in South Africa and globally. I think one of the organizations, and you can see the picture there that I have, is Working on Fire that we have worked on. And I must say that organization is an EPWP, Expanded Public Works program run in South Africa. And it has a very distinguished reputation of actually having the highest number of females in their fire teams. This is not only in South Africa, but internationally. So I think we are making good progress in changing the face of fire managers and firefighters in our country and globally. And I hope I will continue to support that. I must say also, when we are on the fire line and we are burning in the park or in any areas, there is only one fire boss. We know that fire, when you're working with fire and burning, because you are put into a life-threatening situation very often, there is no democracy. So when you are in charge of a fire team, managing fires and doing prescribed burning, you are the fire boss. And it was very earlier on that I had to learn that this is the way it is, and you have to be confident, you have to know what you're doing, you have to be able to communicate clearly with your team in order to carry out these fires. I must say that some of the highlights that I've had in my career, spanning the 20 years in the Kruger National Park, I am very fortunate to be part of one of the longest fire herbivory experiments in Africa, and that's the long-term burning experiments. And the two gentlemen there, Andre Potgieter and Winston Trollope, where basically they maintained the experiments and started it, and that's who I've learned from. So it's something that we are continuing, and we have a lot of students going through that program. It's an excellent experimental field laboratory that we maintain in the Kruger National Park. So that is really one of the highlights that I have. Another highlight that I have in my career here was we managed to do something that many people thought were crazy. We burnt what we called a high intensity fire experiment, burning under conditions, what we call 30-30-30 conditions. So these are very high fire danger indices. And there was a lot of preparation, but we did that quite safely. And I'm sure Wendy will speak about with climate change, we were able to show, and we know the temperatures are changing, that these are the types of fires that we are going to be regularly managing in our national parks. We see it from our Table Mountain fires. the recent fires in the Garden Route, so Naisna. So by allowing us to burn these fires, we've been able to hone our skills in the Kruger National Park. So that's something that's very important. I must say that I always say that I've been supported a lot. I mean, Charlotte has mentioned that there are, yes, challenges, but we mustn't dwell on that because we are paving the way for not only female conservationists, but younger generation of conservation who would like to get interested in managing our ecosystems in the country. So, you know, you need to set the legacy. You need to pave the way for people to come, as I have been very fortunate to receive in the Kruger National Park. Specifically, I speak to my colleagues, Richard Mashaban, who is with the fire, a drip torch there in the picture, that was instrumental in teaching me on how to burn in the veld. So he was willing to share his information with me, and I always try to do that to up and coming young conservationists who are interested in fire. And I try to convince as many as I can to become interested in fire. The other thing is that I would like to give credit where credit is due. And as I said, with Mashaban, Andre Potgieter, Winston Trollope, then Brian van Wilgen and William Bond. These are the mentors that I have. And we can see that it is a very male-dominated group that I have there. But I would like to then be someone's inspiration. I strive to do that in future, to be someone's inspiration to carry on with fire ecology. So I think that's my, not only fire ecology, but also in conservation. And I think we've been very fortunate. I have been very fortunate to be working in sand parks and the Kruger National Park. And essentially, I like to say that I'm living the dream, and I wish that for everyone out here. Thanks. Gabby, back to you.
Thank you, Navashni. Next, we are going over to Wendy Foden. She, as I call her, is the climate change lady. So she will present to us her story of how she got into sand parks, how she got into conservation. And over to you, Wendy.
Thanks very much, Gabby. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all this evening. I wanted to share my personal story in how I landed up working in climate change. Gabby read out a bunch of credentials and bits and pieces, but there's a much more interesting story than that, and that's how this girl aged 12 landed up not becoming the farmer's wife. I came from a background where kind of women were never the breadwinners, and that was really the role models I had. My grandfather had a farm, and so he had lots of these farming magazines, and those are the women I saw and what they were doing with their lives. So that was more or less what I expected. So I tootled along, and I enjoyed nature. So I studied nature, and I guess my mother assumed that I was, well, she said to me, study physiotherapy because you'll meet a doctor, and then you'll have a great career for working part-time when you have kids. I'm afraid her plan totally backfired. I hated physiotherapy and loved nature, and now I'm the doctor. So anyway, what happened? I just started working. I passed through the university system kind of in a fairly nondescript way and just started working, luckily at Sandby. And then came the transition to New South Africa, and employment equity suddenly became a big thing. So in science and conservation, suddenly a lot of posts needed to be filled by women. And those of us who had degrees were put into positions, often just to kind of, it seemed just to kind of be a token, which was really interesting to be a part of. Certainly, I was put into a position I didn't even apply for. It was way above my capacity. And there came the question of what am I going to do with this? And it was incredibly daunting, but I worked like mad, and I tried really hard, and I made a lot of mistakes. But it was an incredible gift because it really upped my game enormously and got me used to jumping into situations where I'm not entirely comfortable. Yeah, what did I end up doing? It seemed that the road sort of rolled out in front of me through a bunch of luck and a hang of a hard work. So these are just some pictures of some of the cool things, just a few of the cool things I got to do through my career so far. The top left is up in the Arctic on Svalbard, looking for seals to do testing and checking out the polar bears. And that's in Borneo, where we were looking at tree restoration, but bumped into a bunch of orangutans. Here's with some nuns in Thailand, planting trees, diving off Mozambique. This is in northwest India on the border with China, looking at retreating glaciers from old pictures that I tracked down through the Royal Geographical Society in London. This is walking through South Luangwa National Park in Zambia. I was invited and worked for a while with Harvard University. This is another lady that I got to interview about climate change in the top of the Himalayas. She gave me a fossilized seashell that she collected there. So just amazing experiences, and there are so many more. Oh, the bottom right is a recent trip in a helicopter over Table Mountain National Park. So just a few things, crazy animals I've got to meet. The bottom left is a blue whale on that Arctic trip. We did some genetic samples, and I still feel honored to have been effectively spat on by a blue whale. So yeah, just a great time. Some of my proudest moments were finishing and launching a book, which you can see on the bottom left, about how to assess climate change vulnerability of species. And also working in Cambridge, I got to do a postdoc fellowship, and that was my little office. So yeah, I guess it was just one foot in front of the other. Again, meeting amazing people. You probably recognize this tall guy here as Al Gore. So meeting there. I worked with David Attenborough. I don't have a picture of that particular meeting, but there he is. Bill Sutherland, my hero in Cambridge. Bob Scholes, the late and great, I got to work with. And I chair this group of scientists from around the world on climate change science and impact on biodiversity. So really incredible opportunities to learn from these folk. But something you will notice is that in almost all of these pictures, it's mostly men, and older white men typically as well. And these are the environments as scientists, as a scientist, a women scientist, that really I've spent most of my career in. And it's challenging because, as Navashni said, we don't have a lot of role models for women in science. So I'm really glad to be part of the South African scientific community. So there's scientific services at SANParks. And you'll note how many women there are amongst this group. That is not how it works in most of the world. Our employment equity processes over the years have really helped us integrate our workforce. And it makes an enormous difference to how things work and the workspace. I've come back to South Africa, and I, out of choice, and absolutely love working with all these women. And yeah, each one of them has also had, all these scientists have had an interesting career that they bring in how we work in SANParks and how we manage our systems. Also, the rest of the world is drawing on us because often they are short of women for representation. So yeah, I just like to say it's been an interesting road that has given me both disadvantages and advantages. And it's I'm sure, as you'll hear from the other women, a unique road. And the last thing I just like to say is it's been a lot of fun. And I think as long as we keep it fun, we keep our energy going. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. Interesting, very interesting talk. Next up, we have Dr. Alison Koch. She is the SANParks marine biologist, and as I like to call her, our shark lady. Alison is probably going to tell us something about sharks, which always interests me. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you very much, Gabby, and a very good evening to everybody joining us this evening. When I was asked to tell my story tonight, it really was a difficult choice for me. And what I've decided to share with you tonight is some of the lessons that I've learned in dealing with conservation challenges and with human-wildlife conflict. My origins in conservation are specifically around shark conservation and in particular great white sharks. And my love for sharks in the ocean started at a very young age when I was a little girl snorkeling with my father. And he used to take me out snorkeling with him and collecting crayfish. And occasionally these little cat sharks or shy sharks would get caught in the crayfish nets. And when they're caught in these crayfish nets, they come up and they go into a defensive little ball. And I was very concerned about these young sharks. And my father used to tell me I should just give them a quick kiss on the nose and then release them safely. And of course I did, and I was thrilling to see them swim off. So my passion really started from a young age to be a marine biologist. And throughout high school, I had a poster-sized banner above my home desk with the words, "My goal is to be a marine biologist." And this led me to pursue a degree in biological sciences at the University of Cape Town. And I eventually completed a PhD on the behavioral ecology of great white sharks in Cape Town, particularly around their movements and their behavior and what was driving those movements. During this time, I also set up the first white shark research program in Cape Town, and I helped co-establish the Save Our Seas Foundation Shark Centre in Kalk Bay, where I worked very closely with the City of Cape Town and the very new Shark Spotters program to provide evidence and evidence base for decision making around water users and white sharks and the interactions between those. It was really a couple of years into my research in about 2003, where Cape Town experienced a spate of shark bites and fatalities. And this really created a lot of fear and anxiety for locals and for the adjacent communities. And it received tremendous amounts of national and international media attention, and consequently a lot of political attention as well. Because I was the only one doing research on the species in the area at the time, I was approached by government officials, by the media, and by the public, looking for answers around what could be causing the spate of shark incidents. And it was really at the beginning of my research. I was only 2 years into my master's research, and given the complex nature of the situation, I did not have all of the answers. I still don't. But when people started calling for the sharks to be culled, because there was this perception that their populations had exploded in numbers, or that there was these rogue sharks swimming around with the taste of human blood, I felt very strongly that culling sharks would not solve the problem and would have repercussions for the marine environment. And so as a result, I was often quoted in the media alongside well-known established surfers, members of the public. We were often pitted against one another, and I became a target for people's anger and fear, and was heavily criticized at the time. And as a young woman scientist, the attacks became very personal, and often spoke to my inexperience or my scientific ability. And some people even perceived me as putting shark life above human life, with one person even calling me a murderer with blood on my hands for being a shark conservationist and wanting to conserve sharks. And at the time, I took this very personally, and it affected me very deeply and caused a lot of anxiety. And in many cases, this made me work even harder to prove myself in the shark science field and in the conservation field. And eventually, the conflict and the anxiety around the conflict became so much that I even started questioning whether I wanted to continue working in the conservation field. And this was around about 2012. However, it was around about this time that I started communicating with a wonderful woman and a specialist in human-wildlife conflict, Francine Madden. And she listened to my story, and she convinced me to spend a week with her in Botswana on a course that she was running all around human-wildlife conflict. And I decided to attend this course, and on this course there were representatives from all the Southern African countries, and many had these stories of conflict, and many were very similar in nature. So even though the conflict arose around sharks or rhinos or lions or elephant, there were some very similar situations running throughout them. And what this course actually did was it applied a conservation conflict transformation theory and skills and processes and strategies to find long-term solutions to conflict. And it was really during this course that I learned important lessons that helped me to deal with conflict in a much more constructive manner and to use it in other conservation challenges even to this day. The first lesson I want to share with you was that I learned that human-wildlife conflict is not really about wildlife at all. It's about human-human conflict and what to do about wildlife. Wildlife doesn't have a say. The sharks are not part of the meetings to decide whether to cull them or not. The elephants don't get to decide whether a fence goes up or not. And thus, I really learned that the conflict is centered around people. And so, unfortunately, as ecologists and as conservationists, we're not trained to understand people behavior. And at the time, I knew more about shark behavior and found it easier to work with great white sharks than I did with people. I therefore had to learn new skills to help me constructively deal with conflict. And I had to develop a greater understanding of what conflict means. And another thing that I learned was that conflict has many layers. There are layers that are very obvious, such as a dispute around what to do about lions or how to manage elephants or whether or not to cull sharks. That is the very sort of surface layer of conflict. But often what I've learned is that there are underlying levels of conflict. For example, a mistrust of scientists or a mistrust of government officials that simmer underneath the actual dispute that's at hand. And there are even deeper conflicts of identity level conflicts where people at their very core feel that their identity may be at risk in certain situations. And so I learned that by identifying these levels of conflict, one can start to really address the conflict in a constructive way. I also really learned the importance of listening, truly listening to what others have to say. And this really allows one to better understand where people are coming from, to try and identify what their fears are, to try and identify what's at risk for them in a situation of conflict. And listening is not, and not talking is a lot easier said than done, because we all want to feel heard, we all want to have our say. But I now really try and explicitly listen before I start talking. And whenever I find myself trying to push my point of view, I kind of make a mental note and say, Alison, stand back again and really try and understand where people are coming from. We also often make assumptions when we talk into one another, when we don't truly listen. And it's incredibly important to listen and ask questions for clarity, to make sure that what is being said is also what's being heard. And that way you can find a greater level of understanding and hopefully come to solutions. But I think that most importantly, what I've found throughout this journey is that, you know, to find long-lasting solutions, one really needs to look at one's so-called rivals as fellow human beings. You need to understand and respect the struggles that people bring and that they bring to the table. And you really need to acknowledge how your own actions shape and contribute the conflict. And again, this is quite difficult to do because we often just focus on that surface level conflict, and we don't really go deeper and address these underlying levels of conflict. And so this experience throughout my journey and into SANParks, I do still get to work on sharks, but I'm now working at a broader scale, looking at marine protected areas. And there's still a lot of animosity around marine protected areas and lack of access that these have for local communities. And so I've now really tried to take these lessons that I've learned to apply it to the work that I do within SANParks, and whether it's marine protected areas or working with African penguins or whales or sharks, I really try and bring these lessons to find meaningful solutions to these challenging conservation conflicts. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to answering some of your questions. Back to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Alison. Great talk. Now, next we go to Lindiwe Makabela. She is what I call, I'm not sure if it's the animal investigator or animal whisperer, but she's a veterinary technologist at SANParks Veterinary Wildlife Services in Kimberley. Over to you, Lindiwe.
Thank you, Gabby. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone. So how did I become a veterinary technologist? When I was in grade 9, I was selected to attend a girls' camp for math, science, and technology career guidance that was presented by females in those fields. There was a Black veterinarian there whose presentation caught my attention. I was scared of animals then and couldn't see myself studying more than 4 years, so decided to take veterinary technology instead. Even though I couldn't physically help the animal, as a vet tech, I was making a difference in the animals' lives in a way. As a vet tech in SANParks, I oversee the preparation and long-term storage of biological samples and maintain the biobank in Kimberley. I collect, process, and store biological material from animal origin. So I have the best of both worlds, being in the field and in the laboratory. The challenges I have faced and overcame in SANParks. Number one, firstly, I grew up knowing that anything related to animals was a white thing. Then getting over the fear of certain animals. Then there is prejudice. There's only 3 females in a team of 16, and the men always treat me like a princess, like I can't lift anything heavy, climb or jump on a truck. So basically they treat me like an egg, which irritates me a lot. So I always have to prove myself in the field that no, I can also do this. I can run as fast as them. I can carry whatever they carry. Okay, some of the loads I can carry. And I can do pretty much what they can do. So yes, that's my short story of being at SANParks in the conservation department. Over to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Lindiwe. Great hearing about your career and how you got into this industry. Finally, our last panel member is Tiniko Golele. She is the regional ranger of the Shanatseni North region in the Kruger National Park. Tiniko, over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Not you. Oh, I can't. Hold on. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Tiniko Galele. I'm the regional ranger of the Shanatseni North in the Kruger National Park. I was born in the village called Mutititi, very close to the western boundary of the Kruger National Park in the northern half. So tonight I'm just going to share the interesting moment of my journey as the ranger in the Kruger National Park. So the interesting moment of my career as a ranger was when I attended an advanced field ranger course at Sand River Base here in the Kruger National Park near Skukuza. By then, I was the section ranger at Punda Maria in 2014. So the reason for doing the training was that in KNP, all rangers were trained basic field ranger training, which was specifically focused on conservation aspects such as patrol monitoring, field condition assessment, water provision, and defending ourselves from animals, and also working with the researchers. As time goes on, around 2010, we started to experience an increase in rhino poaching, where as the ranger we're encountering armed poachers with heavy weapons. So the training was a paramilitary style of training, which was based on military model to equip rangers with the skills to protect themselves from armed poachers and also the use of minimum force as per the Criminal Procedure Act. So it was necessary for us as rangers to undergo such training, and we were trained by well-experienced Jack Reef, who served in the military, who also served as a section ranger in the Kruger National Park. So the training requires self-discipline, resilient, and it also focuses on capacitating leaders on command and control. So we were doing firearm training. We used to shoot in the morning and also in the afternoon, sometimes during full moon and at night. And the purpose of doing that was to recognize different sound of firearm being used by poachers and the distance at which they were shooting. So within the ranger, women were introduced in the year 2000. So there were people within the Ranger Corps who were accepting women, and there were people who were not accepting women. There was a little bit of resistance because women were introduced late in the Ranger services. So because of that, it created some uncomfortableness. So before the training, there was a predator omnivore within me that was so powerful to combat, which was fear. I could not believe that I possess such low core value, such as fear of failing. However, I dig deeper within me, only to find out that I possess some middle core value that made me cross the river of fear. And such middle core value was backed by my background and the way I was raised, the unconditional respect for all, humility, Ubuntu, knowledge of the bush, self-confidence and tolerance. And that gave me strength to cross the river of fear. I gained courage. To overcome fear and capitalize on my high core value. My high core value was the energy that I have, the passion for love of nature, the hard work, determination. I push beyond limits and withstanding temptation. You know, sometimes as humans are easily tempted, and as rangers, we are interested in protecting fauna and flora for the nation. And some of the fauna are of higher value. So I always pray to God to say, God, help us not fall into temptation. I always pray for my team. I always encourage and motivate them not to participate in criminal elements. Yeah, so that's what made me cross the river of fear. And then during the training, there were other women. We were only 3 women in a team of 15. There's this woman called Agnes Mgondeneli. She was also a ranger by then. And she possessed some strong backbone of leadership support. She's the one who supported us during the training. She encouraged us, and an unconditional respect for other women and for all the team members. So she was the one who was encouraging us to carry on and not to give up during the training. So I felt that as a woman, we need to encourage each other, create opportunities for fellow women who wants to participate in conservation. And again, what made us survive the training was the character, the commitment, the courage, and discipline. And the leadership for the future requires women because of our compassion and empathy. The reason why I'm saying that this story was much interesting for me is that I could not believe that I possess such low core values. I thought I was strong. And during my time as a ranger in a low level position, I used to tell myself that I'm a survivor, I'll survive, and I'll keep on surviving in whatever way. But when I attended this course with people who were not accepting women, it gave me a little bit of a discouragement. But however, I've managed to overcome and cross the river of fear. So I would want to encourage women and this platform to say that if you are possessing some of those low core values, the favoritism, the fear, the gossips, the pride, you must get rid of it, because it's some of the limitations that prevent people to reach their goals, prevent people to be productive in the work environment. We need to think positive. We need to focus on the high core value, the courage. We need to be courageous. We need to have character, courage and integrity. And that's when we're going to win as women in conservation. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanika. Wonderful presentation and very interesting to hear from your side. With all our ladies having given their stories about working for SANParks, talking about their passion, talking about the love they have for their jobs, I have now got a few questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. We will try and answer as many of them as possible. We did plan for this to be 1 hour, but it seems that we have very inspirational ladies speaking, and I'm glad to see most of you are still here. So we will start with the first question. I will direct them to our presenters and our panelists. Our first question comes from Judith. It is going to be directed at Dr. Charlotte Nkuna. She'd like to hear about the strategy of increasing the number of women within SANParks working in conservation. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Gabby. Thanks, Judith, for that question. We do have a very clear strategy for recruiting women. We can see that in the results that we've seen in the last number of years. And when we do our selection, we have a selection criteria that favors women and also favors Black people as well. So we do set these targets. We set them on an annual basis. We actually set 5-year targets, which we then monitor and measure ourselves against. So it is quite very structured and very deliberate. And we have seen the results of that in the last few years. And as you can see, there's quite a good representation of women in various parts of the organization, as I alluded to earlier in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Our next question is, what are your views on the future of conservation management and working with many privately owned reserves in South Africa? Is there an active role for joining forces with many reserves to achieve a joint goal in conservation? This one we will direct to Navashni, please.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you, Judith, for the question. Yes, I mean, SANParks recognizes that we can only improve our conservation estate in the country if we take hands with partners, because we can't do it by ourselves. So in Kruger, we have a long-standing relationship with our private, specifically game reserves, and we even drop fences with them, and we co-manage the landscape. So that takes place in the Kruger National Park. It's not only private reserves that we would join hands with or join land and have a common goal with conservation. It's also provincial game reserves. We're now working towards many provincial engaging with the provinces, so that they can extend and join SANParks. There are also a lot of communal lands and community-run conservation areas that we will also incorporate. So as long as we see that in our parks in the garden route, where there's private landowners also joining to increasing the conservation estate. So there is very much an opportunity, and we do encourage that, as long as we have co-management and a common goal. But also, we must also recognize there's a lot of trans-frontier parks. So not only within South Africa, but we do have trans-frontier conservation areas with South Africa and our adjoining countries to South Africa. So I would say, Judith, we do that actively, and we would like to encourage that to take place. Thanks.
Thanks, Navashni. Can you stay on? There's a question. I was going to direct it to Nico. Maybe she can come in after you, but how closely do you work with the community surrounding the park? And in the same vein, do you think women would be more effective in this role than men?
Yes, I just say yes and put a stop to it. No, so I think we, I speak from my experience with the Kruger National Park. So working with local communities, encouraging the communities and school groups to learn about conservation and come into conservation is something that we do have an entire department doing that, and that is encouraged. And it takes place because our national parks are not islands. We recognize that we are surrounded by communities, and we need to build these relationships and show benefits of national parks to the local communities and the surrounding areas. So we do that actively. With regards to women, women can do it better. And I think the question was also, how do we encourage the participation of women in conservation? And in Kruger, we have a facility, campus, the Skukuza Science Leadership Initiative, that over the last 5 or 6 years, we run programs called Women in Science. So we will go to school groups and try and get the kids really early on to come and experience the Kruger National Park, because very often you may be living next to a national park, but you haven't even actually been to a national park. So, and that's how my career was changed, where I experienced camping for the very first time, and it just changed derailed my whole career path. So we get them young, get them the interested students, and really focusing on women in science. So we do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Navashni. And I'd just like to apologize to my viewers. My female pet dog would like to be part of this webinar, and that is why she's barking so much in the background. Apologies. Our next question is for Alison. There's actually 2 questions for Alison. Alison, the first one, can you give us an example where you open up in conservation with other parties? So how do you resolve conflicts, and how do you convince other people that conservation is the way to go? That's from Judith. And then I think that is it at this stage, Alison.
Thank you very much. That's a really important question, and I think one of the first things that we need to do is we need to find common ground. So for example, if I go back to the shark situation, there was a lot of fear around having sharks in the close vicinity of bathers, and there were some extreme views. So on the one hand, you had people calling for the sharks to be culled. On the other hand, there were people saying, well, swim at your own risk. It's a marine or it's a wild space. And what really worked there for a very long-term solution, which is still in effect today, which I'm very proud to have played a small part in, is that at the height of this conflict, the city of Cape Town held a stakeholder engagement process, and they held a very meaningful stakeholder engagement process. Everybody was given a voice. And everybody was given a platform to have their voice heard. And finding the common ground was essential in finding a long-term solution to the issue. And of course, whether you were a surfer or whether you were a shark conservationist, nobody wanted to see human life lost. Nobody wanted to see humans being injured. And if you're a surfer and if you're a conservationist, nobody wanted a marine environment that was unhealthy. And so it started off by finding common ground, and then looking at, finding solutions together, finding solutions that were a win-win for all. And in this particular case, it came through a community initiative where surfers said, okay, well, let's trial surveillance. Let's put somebody on the mountain above these popular beaches. And whenever a shark came into view that posed a risk, let's get the people out the water. And so that program grew then into providing a safety service and building on that with research and understanding and education. And it's grown into a very successful program now that is a community-owned program, and people that were on the extreme sides of the problem are bought into this, and so that was one of the most prominent examples of a situation that I was involved in, where we managed to find a win-win solution for all by listening to one another and finding common ground. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, Alison. Another one, and I think it's part of this, actually, I think it's part of the answer where you spoke about the fight with the fishing communities. How do we find a solution, and how much of the issue lies with big fishing corporations?
This is a very timely question. At the moment, I am part of a task team that was set up by Minister Barbara Creecy to look at the ongoing steep declines of African penguins. And this task team has got representatives of the fishing industry as well as the seabird conservationists. And, there's a lot of scientific debate. There's a lot of differences of opinion. There's a lot of different, reasons or people's views on what the reasons of the decline is. But again, what we've done over these months is to find common ground. So whether you're a fisherman or whether you're a conservationist, you don't want to see the penguins go extinct. And whether you're a fisherman or whether you're a conservationist, you don't want to see people lose their jobs if they can't fish around the island. And so I'm part of this very constructive process at the moment, where we are having very frank, open, and sometimes very difficult discussions. But what we are now trying to do is find a win-win solution where we can find a solution to stop the decline of the African penguin while minimizing any potential management interventions such as island closures, minimizing the cost to the fishery. And I'm very optimistic at this stage that this debate and this constructive discussion and listening to one another, that we will find a solution that is a win-win for all parties involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Our next question is, I think I'm going to direct it to Navashni. Navashni, you mentioned something about programs we have currently going on in Kruger. Mahale Mashalaba would like to ask if any of the ladies offer mentorships to young up-and-coming female conservationists.
Yeah, I also messaged her privately and gave her my email address. So, I mean, I just finished a course now with the South African Wildlife College that, you know, took us to how we can be mentors to African leaders in conservation. So I would really welcome her if she can contact me and we can take it forward. Yeah, so I have sent her my email address. So
thank you, Navashni.
It's in her court.
Thank you, very much appreciated. Our final question that I see is to Tiniko. Tiniko, how do you encourage other fellow female rangers to stay strong?
Thank you, Gabby. I always encourage my fellow rangers, especially within my department, through mentorship and coaching. One of the leadership challenge that I have identified in my area of operation was through value proposition canvas was encouraging women who are lagging behind through mentorship and encouragement and coaching. In my unit, I've got there are 45 women in a junior position, and there are 7 positions in leadership. So we've got 4 men in leadership and then 3 women in leadership. So I always encourage women to work very hard and also to avoid using performance management as a tick box. So normally when we do performance management, we reflect what's happening on the ground and we make sure that whatever we're doing, it reflects on the performance management, and areas of concern are highly noted, and with interventions such as training and mentoring are implemented after the performance management. So even in the neighboring communities, we've got a program called Environmental Monitors. We've got women that are moving from neighboring communities that are patrolling the communal land, also to patrol the western boundary to check whether there are incursions or poachers that are coming into the park and going outside the park, and also to help community in terms of identifying alien species around our communal land, and also identifying damage-causing animal that are escaping from Kruger National Park to adjacent community. So those women are always encouraged to work very hard. I constantly visit them and then communicate with them. One thing that I have learned through the program was that it's very much important to always communicate with people on the ground, because when you shadow people that are working on the ground, you get to know what they are feeling and what they are doing. You get the reality of situation on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiniko. And that is the last of our questions under our Q&A. I would like to thank all of our viewers this evening for joining us and listening to these inspiring stories from the ladies who work for South African National Parks and whose passion and blood is conservation. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. If you have a friend or family who would like to watch this, it will be available in the next few days on our SANParks YouTube channel. Have a good evening and goodbye.